Okay, so I think hopefully most of the people who are supposed to be attending are here now. So I'm going to start speaking in earnest. I'm Duncan Chapple, and what I'm sharing today are the highlights of a Catalyst report that CCgroup will be publishing shortly, called the Industry Analyst Imperative. So later on, I'll be explaining who I am, I'll be explaining what CCgroup is, and I'll be explaining what a Catalyst report is. But basically, that's the framework of what is going on today. We've been doing some research that is bringing together various findings about industry analysts. I'm going to be talking about it today. I will be mostly ignoring questions and comments in the chat until I come to a natural break in the conversation. And if anything weird happens, with the bandwidth or the speed, then type in the chat. Yeah. So what I would ask is that you use the chat for anything that I need to pay attention to right now, like you can't hear me or something like that. And then use the Q&A feature for questions and answers, and then we can work our way through questions and answers. Just as a note for people who have arrived since I started speaking, we will be sending out most of the slides, not all of them, but we'll be sending out most of the slides. We are recording this, and if the recording turns out okay, then we will share the recording with you and with the people who couldn't make it. Okay. So with that said, obviously I have to start with a little bit of an advert. That's why we've asked you here. So before I get into the meat of it, CCgroup is a public relations agency. We have a marketing business, we have an analyst relations business, which I head up. But we are a really nice group of people, actually. We're a fast-growing business. We are focused only on business-to-business technology. We're headquartered in London. We have half a dozen people in the United States, mostly on the East Coast around Washington. We're 30 years young. We're independently owned. Well, I mean, we're owned by our employees, so we're owned by ourselves. We are signatories to the consultancy management standards of the Public Relations Consultancy Association, which means we also have an individual duty to keep up with our professional development. We're really commercially focused, so everything starts from the goals of our customers, and that's why we do these Catalyst reports. I'll explain what they are later on. And we have an in-house analyst relations team. I joined the company a couple of years ago, but actually we've had an in-house analyst relations team for 5 or 6 years. And we are winning a lot of awards. So we won the PR Consultancy of the Year awards from Provoke. That's really nice. And we're formed into 4 kind of vertical streams. So financial technology, mobile and telecommunications, deep tech, what you might call emerging tech, but we call deep tech, and enterprise tech. I mentioned that we're an award-winning agency, but we really are like an award-winning agency. I mean, it's getting quite preposterous now. We're lucky that we're not in the office because it's just full of trophies. But we're really delighted to be consistently recognized for best practice. Okay, so let me get into the meat of the conversation. Really, what we want to do in this study is outline some pieces of research that we've commissioned both recently and in fact for several years about how to influence business-to-business technology buyers through industry analysts. And part of this is new, and part of this is changing. So we do these Catalyst reports. I should have had the slide about what a Catalyst report is before I got into the meat of it. We commission independent research to look at various market sectors. We commission market research agencies. They go out and they interview people, buyers, the kinds of buyers that our customers are interested in influencing, decision makers. And we've just finished 2 of these studies actually in the last couple of months. One of them aimed at telecommunications and networking, and the other aimed at financial technology. And so, looking at the recent trends, the kind of post-COVID-19 trends, what comes across very clearly is that business-to-business technology is changing. So I've been sitting down with the colleagues who run our our telecommunications stream and our financial technology stream, looking through the results. I mean, they've interviewed hundreds of really senior people. It's really quite impressive research. And looking across this, many things are interesting, but there are 5 things that really struck me. And I wanted to start off just by starting with these 5 really big changes which are rippling through this year. Some of them have started in the prior period. Some of them are actually reversing trends that we've seen at the moment. I want to step through these, and obviously the punchline is analyst relations, but that would be too much of a surprise. So one thing that we're seeing is that deal sizes have increased. The last year has been, it's been that last year. It's been incredibly challenging. Organizations have faced really substantial challenges, and that has metabolized itself in different ways. So organizations have had a lot of technology debt, technologies that they should have updated by now, but they've not been doing that. And then suddenly this year has exposed everything that is problematic on bandwidth, on security, on just the transactional load engaged. Deal sizes have increased because people have needed to think much more ambitiously, and in many cases roll out entirely new infrastructures and new solutions. And of course, they're doing that in a situation where their technologies are increasingly distributed to the cloud, and actually their own employees are increasingly distributed to the cloud. So that changes something in the technology nature of organizations, but it also changes them in a human sense. So the second big change that we've seen is sales cycles have shortened. It didn't really feel that way in the first quarter of last year, but right now I think everybody can agree, yeah, sales cycles are shortened. Yeah, it's quite breathtaking. It's quite breathtaking. So organizations are making bigger investments, bigger bets, and they have to make bigger, smarter bets faster. Sales cycles are shortening, and that means that organizations are under more time pressure to roll out new solutions for brand new problems that are hurting them very expensively. And that means that things have to move more quickly. The thing that surprised me the most in these findings is that the number of stakeholders involved in major purchasing decisions is stable or even falling in some of the industries that we're looking at. So we talk about the buying center. There's a network of people who are stakeholders in the purchasing decision, and this has been changing a lot. I've been doing this for 20 years. Back in those days, and very often things had to be built as custom solutions, almost all purchasing went through the CIO's office or was done by technologists. Technologists had to buy it and implement it and do everything with it. Now, of course, you can buy something with your credit card, you can invest in a Salesforce installation or whatever. So the number of people involved in decision making is shorter because time is more pressured, and also because simply the organization is working in a different way. So buying centers are constituted in a more kind of conscious and lean way than ever before. And these two things multiply. So fewer people are involved in the process, so they've got more risk on their shoulders. And then things have to be done more quickly, which means that they've got more risk on their shoulders. And they're more remote from the people who they traditionally might be gathering background information from. So there's more pressure on their shoulders. And what we're seeing is that because of these pressures, vendors are getting involved in the procurement process later, much later. So the whole kind of strategy, requirements analysis, long listing process, this could have been done quite extensively because maybe you weren't under a particular time pressure, but now you have to really accelerate the process. And that means that you are using other resources, not the vendors, other resources to accelerate, to have a catalyst to the purchasing process, to move as rapidly as possible, and to get through to the short list and long list as quickly as possible. So that means that we are seeing dramatically increased use of pretty much all third-party sources. See, I'm an industry analyst relations specialist. I'm going to spotlight the fact that people are using industry analysts more, of course, yes, and they are doing, but they're using everything more, much more extensively. If you're a Gartner customer, you may know this diagram that's a bit like a pie chart. Half of the information sources that people are buying are internal to the organization. Half of the information sources that decision makers are using is external to the organization. I think over the last year, we're seeing fewer people involved internally. This would have been a great pie chart to have on a slide, wouldn't it? The amount of internal information being used is reducing because there are a few people involved, there's less time, less opportunity to source insights. And then the external information that is pressuring the decision-making process is growing. And so consequently, the fifth biggest change is the dramatic increase in third-party sources, and especially industry analysts, and at every stage through this process. Buyers are making less direct engagement with vendors. They're reliant on other information. They have to reduce the pool of vendors available to them. And that means that they are using third-party information sources more. So, I mean, this is probably your life as well. You're probably also using different information sources more as well. So these are the big changes. What I'm going to do now is just flag up the next part of my talk, which is running through these catalyst studies. I'm actually going to introduce what these catalyst studies. I'm also going to take a sip of my drink, and I'm just going to peek over here at the Q&A to see if there's a question that I can leave to the end, or if it's a question that's relevant to the first part of the section. So just be patient with me. Absolutely existential question that I just can't answer. Do these 5 findings change if you subtract activities required to support the move to work at home? I have absolutely no idea. The move to work at home is it's like the big piece of bread in a very heavy, rich salad, yeah. So in a very heavy, in a very filling, rich sandwich. You know, I don't think these changes make sense if you subtract the move to work to home and the disruption in supply chains, everything else that has been going on. But honestly, I would have no way of knowing that without going back and doing more qualitative research. We hired these agencies. They spoke to hundreds of people, several hundreds of people. And I think there will be no way for us to get to that without doing qualitative research. Intriguing question. Let me just step on. So I mentioned we've done these catalyst studies. Let me just step through these because I think they give a good sense of the role of analysts in markets. So if you go to CCgrouppPR.com, click on CCgroup Insight Reports, and then you'll find these papers. There are a lot of them, too many of them. No, not too many. There are many of them, but they are numerous enough to be challenging to navigate through the whole bulk. They reflect independent research commissioned from highly respected research partners. I think it's the biggest ongoing investment program of its type done either by a vendor or by a agency, as far as I know. Each study is dedicated to one industry sector. So as I mentioned, CCgroup itself is organized on industry teams. And so we do this research by industry, unsurprisingly, because we want to help our customers to understand the senior decision makers, who they are targeting, and we want them to understand the information sources that those decision makers use, and of course the balance between analyst relations, public relations, marketing, that they need to do. So take a look at these. The good thing about them is there are hundreds of participants in most of the major Western markets. We're a European company. We've got some people in the United States. You won't be surprised if I tell you that we collect most of our data here in Western Europe or in North America. That is a kind of a limitation, but then it's a very big part of the world tech market. I'm going to step through these reports. We did 5 over the last 5 years. I'm going to step through them, then I'll pause again to see if there are any questions. Well, the most recent is cybersecurity. We actually haven't published this report yet because the data are so fresh. So we asked these senior decision makers what information sources did they use. On all of these slides, they're structured in the same way. Yeah. So firstly, what information channels are you using? And then secondly, in terms of the different content sources, which of them are the most influential? Yeah, so who are you using? Which are the most influential? Yeah, so you might spend a lot of time on a channel, but it might not influence you very much. Yeah. For cybersecurity buyers, industry analysts were the 4th most used channel, 4th most influential channel, the channel through which data was coming after events, business technology, and trade media. In terms of the content types that were influential on supplier selection, super interesting for us, industry analyst reports were number 1. Yeah? So one of the top 4 when it comes to general information gathering, but when it comes to selecting suppliers, 64% of cybersecurity buyers ranked industry analyst reports as being highly influential in selecting suppliers. Really substantial influence. FinTech, another report that we haven't had the chance to publish yet, but the data have been collected at the end of last year. It ranked FinTech industry professionals, people in financial institutions, people in FinTech, in firms providing financial technology, firms providing financial services powered on FinTech platforms rather than traditional banking platforms. They ranked 4th after industry events, peers, and industry consultants as a channel. But again, as a content type used for selecting suppliers, industry analyst reports were first. 57% of the buyers ranked industry analysts as highly influential. Yeah, so we asked them about the channels that they used, and then we asked them, is this channel highly influential on you in selecting suppliers? Industry analysts the first in FinTech. We asked about retail tech. This was one of the more extensive studies that we did, rather harder to replicate. We partnered with Sapio Research to ask a senior purchasing decision makers from 30 of the biggest retailers. I mean, these are extremely large retailers, very hard to get access to them. And then tier 2 retailers. So tier 2 kind of starts at around $700 billion. We asked them about the marketing channels, the content types that had the most impact on them. Industry analysts were ranked 5th behind web search, direct marketing, trade shows, and trade media. But when it came to, the song now, right? When it comes to the content that is most influential on selecting suppliers, again, industry analyst reports were ranked first when it comes to influence on selecting suppliers. Enterprise tech, the enterprise tech study, again, quite a large study, quite hard to replicate. I think we probably will replicate it later on this year. Industry analysts, comment by industry analysts was the second most important factor behind long-standing brand awareness. In the enterprise tech space, industry analyst reports were ranked 4th. Yeah, so really interesting because very often enterprises are in this situation where many decisions are made at the level below. That's where most decisions, or many decisions, are made with the involvement of the CEO. Major tech decisions, 2/3 of tech decisions are made with the involvement of the CEO. Very extensive buying centers in larger enterprises. Like we see buying centers with 10, 20 people in large enterprises. So you can see that wider range of information sources is being used. But even there, 32% of enterprise buyers ranked industry analyst reports as highly influential on selecting suppliers. What we also found, worth mentioning there, is that a quarter of purchasers said the information that they're looking for, only a quarter of purchasers said that they could find the information that they were looking for when they were researching vendors. It's very hard to get the information you need from vendors. The final one of these studies is on media tech. So this is what, five years old now, but a really interesting group of buyers. We worked with Digital TV Europe, and we surveyed well over 100 marketing professionals in the broadcast and media industry to understand how they viewed and how they deployed this information. Really interesting because, of course, they're media consumers, but they're also media producers. So they're deploying marketing. They're deploying marketing communications as well as consuming them. And what we found was that many organizations were really struggling in the media tech market to understand what success looked like, quite simply. With them, industry analysts ranked 6th, so behind existing relationships, peer relationships, trade shows, internal business analysts, and web search. But again, the industry analyst reports ranked 3rd. Yeah, so still highly influential, even in this market, which is simultaneously like very diffuse, very educated, but also maybe moving so quickly that they struggled with strategy. I'm gonna move on now to share some results from the Analyst Value Survey. Again, I'm gonna check in on the questions, check in on my can of 7-Up, see what's going on there. Thank you for using the Q&A, by the way. That's very polite of you. So just on these five stories that I made earlier on, somebody said, "Where did they come from?" I should have been clearer there. These were findings that I've extracted from reviewing the 2 most recent studies that we've done. So sources make that's an egocentric thing to say. The source of these is my analysis of the data collected by the market research companies that conducted the cybersecurity study. Someone asks, how do you define enterprise tech? I mean, I don't, that's a really good question. I wonder if I have that in the speaker notes. But basically, enterprises, they're large organizations that are primarily consumers of technology rather than producers of it, and they have many employees, like 500 employees, more than that. What I recommend is go to the website, download the Catalyst report. You'll get all of the methodology. There. How do we define industry analysts? I mean, actually, this is part of the thing that I'll get into with the analyst value survey. I think the reality is I think one really important reality is how we define industry analysts is not very important. It's whether somebody thinks that they're an industry analyst or not. So, for example, I used to work at Deloitte. That's a fantastic company. If you get the chance to work there, work at Deloitte if you want to. But Deloitte has a research business. It's not an analyst firm, but it produces research. Many people think that Deloitte is in the analyst business. Yeah. So in the analyst value survey, we ask people which analyst firms do they use, and they say Deloitte. Would it be meaningful for us to ignore those results? No, it wouldn't be meaningful for us to it wouldn't be meaningful, wouldn't be helpful for us to ignore those results. On the other hand, as an analyst relations professional, if I'm designing a campaign, I think there's a really big difference between traditional industry analyst firms, which I would define as being organizations that have an independent research agenda. And, they might engage in particular other activities, but the engine of an analyst firm is that it has an independent research agenda where it is writing and producing research. I'd say that's the difference between an analyst firm and a consulting company, which primarily is not engaged in that. Deloitte does produce research, but obviously it mostly does not produce research. It does audit, it does consulting, and it's not mainly involved in the research business. And it's not really commissioned to do that research. Deloitte Research has, as far as I know, no paying customers. It just does that research and gives it away. It's a content marketing machine to get people to find out more about Deloitte. So it's not an analyst firm, but you have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to it. Somebody just asked about the data collection dates on the slides. Are they accurate? Yeah, they are accurate. Yeah. So these different studies were collected over the last 5 years. 2 of them, as I mentioned, the data is still wet on the spreadsheet, but the others were from earlier years. In the list of content types, we separate so we ask about the sources of influence, and then we ask about the content types. So analyst reports, we list those as being separate from white papers, case studies, webinars. And generally it's the case that white papers are not produced by analyst firms. Most analyst firms refuse to produce things that you might call white papers in the sense that they're understood. Very few analyst firms are in the business of producing case studies. And analyst firms do produce webinars, but broadly speaking, a small percentage of webinars are produced by analyst firms. So the primary form in which these buyers seem to engage with analysts is reports. So yeah, it's a little bit fuzzy there. Maybe if somebody says that they're influenced by a webinar, maybe there was an analyst on that webinar. It's absolutely the quantitative research is always like that. There's no way around that. If you want a more nuanced picture, then obviously that has to be done through qualitative research. Really fun questions. Thank you so much. So I want to step now into some insights from the analyst value survey. People probably know, in fact, on the next slide, will it appear? Not sure if the next slide, yeah, here it is, here's the next slide. So at the bottom here, I've got the URL for the Analyst Observatory at the Business School at the University of Edinburgh, here in Britain. It's got that typo in. It's not yeet. Sorry, it's year. But the Analyst Value Survey is the only longitudinal study of the users of analyst firms. It's been going for about 20 years. If you go to the Analyst Observatory website, you can click on projects and then analyst value survey. And you can read more about the survey. There's a beautiful video. I'm in it. It's amazing. And there's a blue button where you can even take part in the survey. The survey is open at the moment, so these are just interim results that we've pulled out. But some things in the survey this year show the way in which the use of analysts, which is always changing, definitely the rate of change is accelerating. So, for example, analyst firms are. Most analysts are in North America. Most analyst firms are headquartered in North America. And for almost all of the 20 years that I've been running the Analyst Value Survey, most of the people who took part in the survey were in North America. And I think that most money that is spent on analyst firms is spent from North America. But actually this year we've seen a huge growth in the rest of the world. So actually this is the first year where fewer than half of the respondents in the survey are in North America. I mean, that could reflect, just not very good data collection, but it's a long-term trend that's been running from year to year, and it shows that as the monetization and go-to-market strategies of analyst firms have become more plural. Basically, 20 years ago, you could really only get analyst research by buying it. Now, with the internet, vendor-sponsored research, freemium research, you have to work pretty hard to pay for something if you're prepared to spend 5 minutes to see if you can get it for free. That has meant that people at different price points and looking for different kinds of information have been able to access more analyst information, and that is especially having an impact in Asia and in mainland Europe, where we're seeing people really using analyst research quite intensively when previously they might have been maybe they're still unsure about paying for it, but they are prepared to buy it. And I think that's also reflected by the growing plurality of different content forms. So peer reviews, for example. Many people consult Gartner Magic Quadrants, but actually more people read Peer Insights than read Magic Quadrants. So different content types, different price points, that accesses a different base of the user audience. User audience is growing in every region, but it's growing especially quickly in Europe and in Asia. We asked people in the study which vertical markets they're interested in. This is also a really intriguing change, because it used to be that people were in like one or two markets at the most, like they might have been in banking and finance, or that kind of banking and insurance. But over the last 20 years, the number of markets that people say that they're interested in has grown. And I think what that reflects is one rather long-term trend on the supply side. The suppliers have verticalized the way that they go to market, so they need more vertical market information, and they are verticalizing their solutions. But now what we see, pretty much any enterprise that is selling business to business now is also verticalizing. Yeah? So, I'm on a swivel chair. Somewhere there is somebody who sells, a swivel chair for manufacturing, a swivel chair that's adopted for healthcare, a swivel chair that's adopted for retail, a swivel chair for the public for the public sector. So I think that's an intriguing trend to see that people are more likely to identify with vertical markets. They're consuming more vertical markets, but some vertical markets are growing faster than others and are more significant than others. So definitely banking, manufacturing and finance, health, retail, public sector had the biggest growth this year. It had the biggest growth last year as well. And one thing that really stood out is just the huge plurality of topics that people are using. So we've done some work to try to build up a taxonomy. There are thousands of topics that analysts produce research on. We built a taxonomy that narrows this down to 50 content classes. We asked people which topics they use research on. And the ones that are captioned here on the chart are the ones which have had the largest percentage growth. So the ones that were big in the first place, obviously it's easier for them to grow by a large, by a large amount. But some of the ones that have grown especially quickly over the last year are enterprise computing, cloud computing, analytics, Internet of Things, and IT services. So people are using more research, they're using research on more topics, and there are particular areas where that growth is accelerating even more quickly. And later on in the Analyst Firm Awards, so people may know CCgroup sponsors the Analyst Firm Awards, which are published by the Analyst Observatory. So in August, May, June, we will publish or start to publish the Analyst Firm Awards together with the Analyst Observatory, and we'll be focusing in these large high growth areas. So more people are using analysts. They're using analysts on more vertical markets. They're using it in more kind of horizontal technology areas, and they're getting more value from that research. Not only from the research, but for all of the different services that that analysts have. So we ask people who are using analyst services about these 8 different kinds of services, and we ask them to rate them, and we want to know which services are highly valuable to them, because we want to make sure our clients are aware of that value. When we look at the percentage of people who scored a service as being high or very high in importance, obviously there are differences between people on the demand side and people on the supply side. Suppliers are really interested in buying reprint rights. People on the demand side, buyers, hardly ever want reprint rights. Suppliers want business leads. People on the demand side want purchasing recommendations and help. They want peer communities. So there are different value propositions for the demand side and the supply side. But across the two of them, analyst value increased almost 10% last year. So the number of people who said that they were getting high or very high value from a service increased by 10%. That's pretty cool. But the challenge for vendors trying to understand this landscape is that the analyst landscape is super complex, super complex. So this is a nightmare of a chart. I apologize in advance for this. So this is a chart that asks people, we asked people which firms they used over the last year. On average, they picked 11. So 11 sounds like quite a big number, but if you think over the course of a year, you're using 11 firms, that's not a huge number. And again, we've used the same methodology. If the percentage this year is notably different from the percentage last year, then it is captioned on the chart. So a firm that is doing well, like I think this orange bar between ISG and Omdia, I think this might be HFS Research or Everest. So the fact that a company isn't captioned on the chart doesn't mean that it's not doing well. It's just mean that it didn't change that much over the last year. So it's a really complex landscape. And imagine if you look at that 84% for Gartner. Imagine if you didn't know anything about the analyst industry and somebody said, well, 84% of buyers are using Gartner. That might give you the idea that, well, in fact, nearly 85% of buyers are using Gartner. That might give you the idea that everybody else is used by 15%. But no, that's not the case at all. Yeah? Everyone's using multiple firms. So Gartner is definitely the biggest analyst firm. It's definitely the most influential firm. But as you can see, Gartner isn't most of the industry. It doesn't employ most of the analysts, obviously. And it doesn't produce most of the insight consumed. It doesn't produce most of the value created by the analysts for the industry. It's a very complex landscape. And if you think of these different countries, these different vertical markets, these different topics, obviously the shape of influence is very different in one market segment to another market segment. And that's why my colleagues and I at CCgroup are busy and happy helping our clients. I want to kind of come to impact, I just want to draw attention again, ao.businessschool.ed.ac.uk. If you want to know more about the survey, please take the survey. I'm going to do my 7-up thing again. I'm going to have a sip of my drink, take a look at the questions, and then come back to the final section. Excellent, good, no questions. I want to come to the end and make out some points about influencing industry analysts quickly. I sell to analyst relations leaders. Yeah, they're my customers. Our customers in the analyst relations team are people who are responsible for their vendors' analyst relations, and that might be large companies, public companies, listed companies. That might be $50 million companies, $100 million companies, whatever. We're working all the way along that. We asked 49 senior analyst relations leaders. Sadly, most of them not our customers. Most of them, people we'd like to work with. What their problems were, and we break up the analyst relations activity into these 5 blobs. So if people have seen Ephraim Malek's book on analyst relations or my book with Sven Littke on analyst relations, they both use the same 5-point structure. And what was interesting was that when we asked people what the bottleneck was for analyst relations being more successful in their organization, it wasn't engagement with analysts. It was identifying, so making sure that you know the right analysts. It was alignment, so it's speaking to those analysts in language that would be influential on those analysts. It was perception and coverage metrics, so understanding what the analysts think about you, being able to track different analyst firms are more or less positive about you. And then finally, and this is definitely the growing interest from many clients, is leverage. So finding analyst content that is favorable at your market, spotlighting the business problem you address, maybe even saying nice things about you, and then amplifying that, pushing that content out to a broader market. But we found that this thing, basically a quarter of people have said that their critical bottleneck was the ability to leverage the outputs of their analyst relations program. And that is a really serious challenge that we're putting more attention into. As an analyst relations team, we're putting more effort into identifying analyst comments and insights, helping our clients to value them, raising awareness of what analysts are saying with their own colleagues and with their clients and prospective clients. And this 5-point structure is also the way that we structure our own analyst relations efforts. So you can tell here I'm pivoting smoothly into the advert. This is the way that we structure our analyst relations effort into these 5 pillars. Not everybody buys everything. Some people have got particular problems with 1 area, 2, 3. We provide capacity to help organizations to fill this. But I think it's interesting to think about this as a both from the perspective of the analyst and from the perspective of a vendor trying to sell. Vendors are prioritizing analysts, and they're trying to prioritize the analysts who are most visible as providing value, either insights to help them to change what they're doing in their market, or insights to their customers, to their potential customers. That's very important. Alignment is a really key issue. Yeah, very often analysts will develop their own language. They'll have their own taxonomies. They'll try to develop their own 3-letter acronyms, and sadly, vendors are even more guilty of that crime. So sometimes habit. Very often we'll find that it can be quite difficult for people who are in the same market, who are trying to solve the same problem for enterprises, even to agree on a common vocabulary and to more clearly understand how they can develop a shared perspective. So that alignment is really important for us. If you just put people in the room together and they can't translate, they don't share a common vocabulary, if one of them hasn't learned how to adapt to the others, then we do that. Engagement naturally is our bread and butter. What we're trying to do is not put you in front of analysts who'll go to the opening of an envelope. We're trying to put you in front of analysts who will genuinely find what you have to say valuable, and people who are genuinely influencing the people who you want to influence. You might be interested in the analysts who are influencing investors or buyers or regulators or journalists. People who've got different goals for their analysts. It's not obvious which analysts you should be put in front of. Evaluation is so important. Actually, many analyst relations programs find it very hard to explain what they're doing other than measuring their activities. And what we are doing is helping them to measure the quality of the interactions that they have and track the outputs, and then leveraging these outputs. So we are working, as I've said, with startups, with established tech companies. We're really helping them to build credible, meaningful relationships. And with all due modesty, we really have a strong track record of success in building analyst relations programs for people. And as a reminder, we are basically offering critical success factors all the way through this cycle. So I've been Duncan Chapple. I'm the Associate Director at CCgroup, who heads up the analyst relations team here. We're working across the whole range of analyst relations activities, and we would be delighted to answer your questions and work with you in the future. So let me just take another drink of this magical can of 7-Up that's lasted for so long, and I'll see if there are any more questions. I can see that there are a few. That's fantastic. Frost & Sullivan. Why are so many people using Frost & Sullivan? So let me just go back to that analyst values survey slide. Frost & Sullivan is one of the biggest and oldest analyst firms. I mean, I think it may actually be the oldest analyst firm. It's absolutely not going away. How can I put this politely? Frost & Sullivan enthusiastically works with vendors to help them distribute Frost & Sullivan research, which is relevant to those vendors' audiences. And very often vendors will license content from Frost & Sullivan, and they will diffuse it more widely. And Frost & Sullivan, if Frost & Sullivan likes you, they will let you know about that. If you've got a good piece of research, if you've won an industry award, they will reach out and tell you that. And remember, it's a pretty big firm, which, if you think Frost & Sullivan and IDC are often the only analyst firms in your country. If you're in not even small countries, if you're in a country, you're in Indonesia, you're in Pakistan, you're in Bangladesh, you're in countries with like 100 million people, right? IDC and Frost & Sullivan might be the only people with analysts in your market. So if vendors want to work to access those markets, then they'll be using them. So Frost & Sullivan is real. Is the pandemic restricting the way that analyst firms influence buyers' decisions? Well, obviously, there are some things that have dramatically been curtailed. Face-to-face events are not happening. But I think that is overwhelmed by the increasing use and increasing utility, the developing value of other things that analysts are doing. So I think that actually the pandemic is massively amplifying the power of analysts rather than constraining it. Are there reasons why HFS, Everest, and Nelson Hall did not figure out in our survey? I mean, they did. They absolutely did. They are in our survey. So I'm not calling out here in these captions the biggest firms. Obviously, many of them are quite big. I'm just picking out the companies here that have moved the most because, well, this chart would be overwhelming, wouldn't it? There's just no way to make this diagram work if I have a label on every company. If you have a suggestion about how to do that, let me know. So I'm not saying that HFS, Everest, and Nelson Hall are not influential. They're certainly among the bars on this. And if you, of course, if you want the full research, you have to go to the Analyst Observatory website and get the report. I'm not saying that they are not performing well. I'm just saying that their influence didn't change. Well, rather, this analysis suggests that their influence did not change by a bigger percentage than these other 21 firms that had more notable changes. Obviously, these are serious firms. Industry analysts rank high in vendor selection, but is this more the case with long listing, short listing, or final choice? Well, what our data suggest in these catalyst studies is that analysts are certainly influential in the long listing process, but they are more influential in short listing. So you see that they are, for example, as content source is used, that relates, I think, to the fat end of the decision-making funnel. They are a bit lower down, and then analysts rise in prominence. They rise to the top, in fact, in almost all markets, towards the shortlisting and final choice market. My firm seems to omit European analyst firms. Well, it doesn't omit European analyst firms. I mean, some of the firms here are European. Some analyst firms, I don't know, they may not even have a clear opinion about whether they are European or not. But what I'm doing here is what this chart does is it picks out the firms that have changed the percentage the most. I would definitely say that Omdia is certainly a European company. Obviously, Analysis Mason is a European company. Global Data, well, that's a European company. Bloor, well, that is a British company. Kuppinger Kohl is German. Bark is German. So, I mean, actually, several of these firms are European. ISG, certainly has a very large European component here. 451, arguably was English when it was founded. So, there are some matters of opinion here, but certainly some of these firms are European. But I don't think it's the case that I don't think most analyst research consumed in Europe as a whole is produced by European headquartered firms. But obviously, very few of these organizations are, like who's writing research in German here, right? Bark is producing research in German. Kuppinger Kohl is producing research in German. I think ISG might produce some research in German. So, relatively small number of these organizations are able to function meaningfully in Spanish, in German, in Arabic, in Chinese. I mean, there's big network, big ring-fenced markets, which probably our survey doesn't touch. Our survey is only in English. Do we aggregate these as buyer influences versus seller influences? Yeah, we bisect. We bisect the sample in the full analyst value survey report. The Analyst Observatory separates out the supply side from the demand side. That's why I talk about that much. 11 firms being used per organization. No, it's not 11 firms used per organization. It's 11 firms being used per individual, per participant. Are there patterns in how they're being used outside of help on long and short lists? Probably, but I don't have that information in front of me. In the detailed analyst value report, you could probably get to that. Is there a difference in the list of analysts from the supply side and the demand side? Yeah, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. If yes, and that is one of the charts in the analyst value survey report. Will we share a link to the recording? Really interesting question, actually, because we may need to edit the recording, I realize, but But we certainly are recording it, and the replay will be available if you come back on the link that you used to get into the webinar. But I imagine we'll share a link, but I don't believe that we've done so far. So you may have to email and ask if you want the link to the recording. Are there industry splits in the data? Are there specific companies preferred in fintech? Yes, there are. So again, that is broken out in the analyst value survey report. If you buy the analyst value survey, it's like I'm doing an advert for the university here. That's ridiculous. Just go to the Analyst Value Survey website if you've got specific questions about the survey. Right? It's not CCgroup, not the university. But these data are, these data can be broken out. You can see the way that they're segmented. The data can be broken out by the way they're segmented. I think I'm going to wrap up soon. My hour is almost up. We'll be able to share most of these slides. So not the slides from the Analyst Value Survey, because as I mentioned, survey is still open. These are interim results. If they get shared too early, then I'm just using these data to influence to suggest the complexity of the market. I think these were all of the questions. Yeah, good. Okay, fantastic. Oh. Do I have any information on the number of seats the company that are? No, our survey doesn't collect information about how many seats analyst firms have. I don't think that that's a very meaningful question. Anymore. Actually, forgive me for being rude. It's a bit rude. But what I mean is, most people who consume Gartner research, for example, are not Gartner seat holders, right? So imagine if 10 million people consume Gartner research. It doesn't really matter if 4 million of them are customers, if 5 million of them are customers, if 6 million of them are customers. Not clear to me. What matters to me is which firms are they using, what are they using it for, and how influential do they say it is on them, and whether they're paying for that or not. That's less interesting for me because I'm not doing market sizing or market analysis. I'm not an investor in analyst firms. I'm just interested in the influence that they have on my buyers' questions. How do we get Gartner info? How do people get Gartner information if they're not Gartner members? Well, I mean, they Google it, obviously. Well, imagine Peer Insights, right? Gartner Peer Insights is the most used Gartner product. You don't have to be a Gartner customer to access Gartner Peer Insights. Anyone can access that. Magic Quadrants are the second most used content type from Gartner. If you pick 20 Magic Quadrants at random, 18 or 19 of them are free to use. They've been licensed and some vendors put them behind a paywall. If there's a piece of Gartner research that is aimed at buyers, it's actually really hard to pay for that piece of research if you spend 5 minutes trying to find it for free. The data that is sold to vendors, obviously that is behind paywalls, right? No vendor is going to license printer market share data to put online, right? But any CIO or almost all major pieces of CIO-oriented research have been licensed by a vendor and put online. Okay, my time is almost up. There's one last question. Super exciting. I love these questions. Thank you. They give me lots of ideas for any advice for small firms or startups on analyst relations strategy. Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, my number one thing is like take a screenshot of this picture. If you the difficult thing about analyst relations is not will the analyst say yes if I ask them to speak to me. If you are not an idiot, if you know how to explain what your company does, that sounded really dismissive, I'm sorry, but if you know how to explain what your company does, then you will almost certainly be able to get an analyst to say yes. The difficult thing is to understand, are you speaking to the analyst who you should be speaking to? So what I've seen, I've spent most of my time consulting two analyst relations teams rather than leading analyst relations. What I've seen is most analyst relations effort is wasted. and it's wasted because people are spending too much time with people who hold less of the influence than the time that they've been given would suggest. And they are spending too little time with more influential analysts who they don't like, who they're not aware of, who are in high growth international markets that they are distant from. Most analyst relations effort is wasted. So that's the number one thing. If you want to think about AR strategy, then actually do that. Think about AR strategy. Yeah, have a strategy. Yeah, don't just go straight into briefings. Yeah, identify the analysts who are going to be most influential. Don't think that the people who are influencing your buyers are the people who influence your colleagues, because the firms who influence the demand side are not always the same as the ones that influence the supply side. Align your message. Yeah, use the analyst's language, not yours. Engagement, you probably won't have a problem with engagement, but extract from those engagements. Yeah, take detailed notes, develop insights, compare insights across briefings, make a note of who else the analysts are mentioning in content, in conversations. And then if an analyst says something that's nice, not just nice about you, that's important about your business problem, that's important about your market, it's important about your market space, help that analyst out. Yeah, amplify what they are saying, retweet it, share it, do an infographic about it, pump it out. Yeah, if our analysts writing useful things about your business problem, you need to amplify those analysts and raise their profile. I'm way over my time now, and I can't believe that most of you are still here. That's extremely generous of you, but I'm going to wrap up now. So thank you so much to you. Thank you so much to those of you who've made it through to the end. Thank you so much to my colleague Katie for standing by in case my internet fails. Thank you to Vodafone for not failing my internet. And please come along. We're going to be doing 8 analyst relations webinars between now and August. A lot of information there. We'll be exploring many of these points. Make sure you're on our mailing list and you'll find out more about it. Okay, thank you so much. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.